Breaking news, Suluhu is out. That's the breaking news that the people of Tanzania are expecting to hear by the end of this week or probably next week. In a bid to influence the Tanzanian public and portray a facade of majority, Samia hired influencers, local leaders, religious leaders, and musicians, including Diamond, Zuchu, and Harmonize, and also a Kenyan who someone on the internet has branded as a notorious speech leaker. But the public, the Tanzanian public, refused to be swayed and driven to a pit full of vipers. This documentary and political analysis will talk about the timeline of events that culminated into the protests that are currently happening in Tanzania and provide reasons that have never been talked about before, reasons why Kenyans are supporting Tanzanians in their fight against dictatorship. To avoid forgetfulness, I've written a script of what I'm going to say. Now, the timeline of events. Protests in Tanzania started on Wednesday, 29th October 2025 during the presidential and parliamentary elections in response to the barring of major opposition candidates and widespread accusations of election rigging and government repression. The main reasons for this protest were: number one, exclusion of opposition candidates. The two main opposition presidential candidates, Tundu Lissu of the Chadema party and Luhaga Mpina of the ACT Wazalendo party, were disqualified from the race on legal technicalities or charged with treason. This effectively left the incumbent President Samia Suluhu Hassan of the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi party, CCM party, running with only fringe candidates. In fact, she was running by herself. She was running ni yeye tu. She was the only one on the ballot papers, leading to critics to label the election as a coronation and not a contest. The leading opposition party, Chadema, was disqualified in April after failing to sign the Electoral Code of Conduct as part of its electoral reforms. Now, they refused to sign it for very major reasons. They accused the government of failing to make reforms or of failing to make electoral reforms that are going to ensure a free and fair elections that were happening in October 29th. The second reason why the protests happened, it was due to undermining of democracy and electoral reforms. I've talked about that. Protesters are denouncing the election as a sham and are demanding genuine electoral reforms that will ensure independent oversight of the Electoral Commission. A key point of contention was proposed measure that would allow the president to directly appoint members of the Electoral Commission. The third reason, increased government repression. The protests are fueled by a broader frustration with the government's narrowing of political space, which includes a wave of terror that was said by Amnesty International of Tanzania, involving arbitrary arrest, detention, forced disappearance. Forced disappearance was very common, torture, and extrajudicial killings of opposition figures and activists. Another reason was socioeconomic grievances. Protesters carried placards demanding the government to address the soaring living cost. Now, to be detailed in this timeline of events, a little bit detailed, on January 2024, thousands protested in Dar es Salaam as the opposition sought amendments to electoral reform bills, which they claimed were designed to protect the ruling party. In mid-2024, human rights groups including Human Rights Watch and a panel of UN experts documented an increase in politically motivated assaults, abductions, torture, and enforced disappearance targeting government critics and opposition members. In August 2024, hundreds of opposition supporters were arrested during protests. In September 2024, a Chadema official was found murdered after being abducted. This even led to more tensions in the country. Now, this is probably the time where the Tanzanians were like, nah, we cannot live like this. We cannot live in such a dictatorship regime. Especially now that they have the internet, they can see how a democratic states can be governed. They thought, nah, this cannot be the case. In early 2025, President Samia's government continued a crackdown on dissent, with the main opposition leader Tundu Lissu being arrested at a rally and charged with treason for demanding electoral reforms, which is an unbailable offense. October 2025 started with a lot of tension. On October 4th, on a Saturday night, Captain John Charles Tesha, in full Tanzania People Defense Force uniform, TPDF, and wearing a light blue beret associated with the TPDF Air Wing, released a very crucial 1 hour 15 minutes video where he expressed great dissatisfaction with Samia Suluhu's regime and called for integrity in the military. He denounced corruption and urged Tanzania People Defense Force to align with the people ahead of the highly contested October 29 general elections. Then on Sunday morning, remember the stream was happening on Saturday morning, on Saturday night. On Sunday morning, October 5th, the Tanzanian government released a statement against the use of social media for spreading misinformation. Captain John Tesha was then arrested and his whereabouts were known. On October 13th, Tanzania's Electoral Commission said that it had disqualified Luhaga Mpina, another serious opposition candidate, on legal technicalities. This left Samia with no major challenges. Now, during this October, Tundu Lissu was arrested and he was in prison. He stayed in prison until the elections, until October 29th. And it looks like he wanted to stay in prison so that when the protest happened, he cannot be blamed for being the cause of mayhem. Okay? Now, on October 28th, international observers and several Western countries withdrew from election missions, citing the lack of a credible and fair process. Now, before the election day on October 29, that was from October 28 moving backwards, there were boiling tensions in Tanzania, and the people of Tanzania, instead of preparing for elections, they were preparing to demonstrate. They were eagerly waiting for demonstrations. People on social media, they were trying to rally each other, rallying people, rallying each other. They started rallying each other online through Twitter, WhatsApp, TikTok. Tensions were boiling slowly. And during the election day, instead of them going to vote in that sham election, the protests erupted in Dar es Salaam and other cities.
Kama unavyoona, hii ni hadi ya magari ya Mwigulu Mchemba ya Esta, yote watu wameyateketeza moto.
Protesters burned polling stations. They destroyed ballot boxes. They destroyed ballot papers. They hijacked the trucks that were carrying ballot papers and some trucks that were allegedly being used to carry votes that were going to be used to rig the elections to help President Samia rig the elections that she is contesting against herself. Okay? And on that October 29th at night, the police ordered a curfew. Now, the world expected Tanzanians to fall back, go into hiding, and tomorrow President Samia will be announced as the winner. No, but that didn't happen. Tanzanians remained in the streets at night. They protested day and night. They shocked the East African community. Nobody expected them, especially Kenyans. We didn't expect Tanzanians to protest the way they did. It was unbelievable. Now, on October 30, protests continued and it spread to other areas, including the border with Kenya in Namanga. The Kenyans in Namanga, they were very eager to help their friends in Tanzania. They were extremely eager. They were itching. They wanted to go for this protest. Now, they wanted to go for this protest. And I'm going to tell you why these people wanted to go to this protest shortly. The government deployed the military to the streets, imposed internet shutdowns. That was on October 30th. And the police used tear gas and gunfire against demonstrators. Tanzanian Gen Zs occupied airports to block politicians and celebrities who supported the government from fleeing the country and face the consequences of their actions. This thirst for vengeance was heavily influenced by how leaders supporting the government publicly threatened Tanzanians against protesting and daring them to do what they can if they want to face the full force of the Tanzanian security forces. Sadly, they failed to realize the force that they were bragging with is the same force that are experiencing the economic strain the civilians are going through. They forgot that this force are relatives to these civilians. Okay? Now, the police, and they also forgot that Tanzania had 71.2 million people, with majority of them being the youths who are dissatisfied with the government. Okay? Now, the Tanzanians protested on October 30th, and there are videos of Tanzanians overwhelming the police and taking their police uniform, wearing them, and now it was even much more difficult to differentiate between a police and a civilian because now they have all the gears. Okay, it was very funny. Videos were going around, very funny videos. Someone equating what is happening to Tanzania to Nepal. Others throwing insults at President Samia Suluhu. That was the only time these people had to throw insults at President Samia Suluhu. That country, you cannot insult the president. And that was the only time. And they used it maximally. Then, on October 31st, the protest enters the third day. That was yesterday. With opposition parties claiming hundreds of people were killed. In fact, not just hundreds, 700 people were killed. The opposition claims that over 700 people were killed, while the UN reported that at least 10 deaths and called for an investigation into the excessive use of force. The media houses in Tanzania stopped streaming the elections. The protests continued, with reports saying that Tanzanian Gen Zs showed up in large numbers to occupy State House. Now, one thing I've also forgot is on October 29th and 30th, Tanzanians burnt so much property. They burnt the property of the president's son. They also burnt the property of Minister of Finance. They burnt the property of the speaker was burnt on 31st October. Diamond, Zuchu, and other musicians, they were alleged to have escaped to Kenya on October 30th. How they did it, we still don't know, but it's alleged that they used an airport. Was it an airport in Tanga? They used that airport and escaped to Mombasa. But the Tanzanians, they occupied so many airports to prevent these people from running. Probably they didn't occupy that one airport, or probably before they occupied it, these guys had already begun their flight. Then on November 1st, today, the Tanzanian Electoral Commission declared President Samia Suluhu the winner with 97.66% of the votes. Now, what we've all been waiting for. Why are Kenyans supporting Tanzania? Now, the Kenyan authorities were wondering, why are you guys supporting Tanzania? Why are you guys so much focused on Tanzania? There are three main reasons why Kenyans are supporting Tanzania in the protest against the dictatorship regime of President Samia Suluhu. One, the first reason is that we share a common plight. Very, very obvious. We share a common plight of government incompetence, mad with corruption, and dictatorship regimes hiding behind the curtains of democracy on the false pretense of a majority ruling, which this majority is not the people, but the members of parliament, whose main purpose is to serve whose main purpose, as declared by the constitutions, is to serve the people. But these members of parliament have decided to serve the presidency. Okay, this is the plight that as Kenyans we share with Tanzanians. Okay, that's the first major reason why Kenyans are supporting Tanzania. The second major reason why Kenyans are supporting Tanzania is that our support for Tanzania is based on the principle of democratic peace theory. Yes, as strange as it might sound, it is based on the principle of democratic peace theory. Democratic peace theory states that democratic states are highly unlikely to engage in armed conflict with one another, and also democratic states are unlikely to engage in conflicts with other countries. Yes, the democratic peace theory, this was a theory by the US, and we know that the US have abused the principles of this theory, but that doesn't mean that this theory is a false theory, okay, and that we do not share this theory as a democratic state. Now, the debate about the US and democratic peace theory, that one we can talk about in future, but I also did it in another video in my documentary. You make sure you watch my documentaries. I did it in a documentary about Ibrahim Traore. Now, let us go back to Kenya and Tanzania. As a democratic state, we have no business engaging in anything with tyrannical states, okay? Unless our relationship is based on mutual socio-economic benefits and not political benefits, on mutual socio-economic benefits. We cannot risk engaging in political romance with tyrannical states, even if it means benefiting us, okay? Which I don't see how it might benefit us. Engaging in political romance with tyrannical states overrides the core tenets of democracy, okay, that we are supposed to uphold at all times. These principles include freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and many more human rights, which are usually abused by tyrannical states, okay? Now, if a head of a democratic state engages in political romance with tyrannical states, we should be very wary, okay? We don't want to have neighbors with tyrannical states, okay? We should be very wary if a head of a democratic state engages in political romance with tyrannical states. We can engage in socio-economic affairs, but political romance, then there's quite, you can draw a red line there, okay? It's quite dangerous. Why? During times of political upheaval, okay, the head of state might want to cling to power, okay? And how will the head of state do it successfully? How will they cling to power successfully? This head of state in a state which shows a facade of democracy, they will borrow support, financial and security support, from the tyrannical states that he or she has had political romance with. And during times of protests, like the ones that are happening in Tanzania, these states, the one displaying a facade of democracy and the tyrannical state, will override the constitutional mandates of their country. These states, and during times of protests, like the ones that are happening in Tanzania, these states, the one displaying a facade of democracy and the tyrannical state, these two states, they will override the constitutional mandates of their country, okay? Deploy security forces from the tyrannical state, okay? They'll deploy security forces from the tyrannical state to help the head of state in this state that displays a facade of democracy to cling to power, okay? There are allegations that such a thing happened in Kenya, but was it proved? It wasn't. Will there be investigation to prove it? I doubt it, okay? And there's even more fear that such a thing might happen in future. Now, such a thing, we do not want it to happen, okay? And if we do not want it to happen, when we see our neighbors revolting against a tyrannical regime, we have to be very happy, because it will work in both of our favor. We'll ensure that our neighbors are democratic, and that there is no time in future whereby the other country will try to use the forces in this country to divide the forces in the other, to divide people in the other country, and vice versa, which will even bring more enmity between us. And since we don't want enmity between us as neighbors, we will support the people anytime they want to overthrow a tyrannical state. The third reason why Kenyans are supporting Tanzania is that we share the East African Community Anthem that vividly states, jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuwajibike, tuimarike, umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. This is not just a song. This is not just a song. Okay? Let me check in English. In English, what this thing says in English. In English, it says, we should protect or guard our community. We should be committed and stand strong. Our unity is our anchor. Long live our community. Okay? Then, the second stanza, it says, patriotism and togetherness be the pillars of our unity. May we guard our independence and peace, our culture and traditions. This is not just a song. This is not just a song. The founding fathers of the East African community had it in mind that they needed to foster economic, political, and social cooperation and integration among its member states. The main objective of the EAC was to establish a common market and customs union, develop regional infrastructure, promote political stability and security, and strengthen cultural ties for the mutual benefits of its partner states. But the leaders of the East African community, they failed to adhere to the objectives of the EAC. Now, if they do not adhere to the objectives of the EAC, who's going to bring them back to line? It's the people. Okay? It's the people that are going to bring them back to line. Now, I need you guys to stay tuned. I'm going to release another documentary about Tanzania, and ensure that you follow, subscribe, like, share this information with every one of your friends, your family, everyone. Okay, in the meantime, watch the documentaries that I have made. I made a lot of documentaries, quite interesting and very informative documentaries. That's the only way you can support me to continue with this, with such kind of analysis. Okay, ensure that you watch them, subscribe, share, and stay tuned. I'm going to release another documentary today.